call this meeting to order. We're just going to proceed with 3 with the lack of quorum. We won't vote on anything unless Troy shows up, but we can strongly suggest and certainly, receive the information and strongly suggest. Correct? Okay, beautiful. One announcement from me, and I'll pass it over to Ms. Harlinski over there. Eric Houghton, did I get that right? Eric Houghton will be joining us and doing his best to fill Elizabeth's shoes. This is your last meeting, isn't it?
This is my last meeting.
Well, we're going to miss you, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. My last day at the city will be October 8th, and so right before the October meeting, and I didn't do that on purpose, but so that makes today the last meeting. So I will miss you all and wish you all well, and parks are near and dear to my heart, so I'll keep my eye on you. And
I'm sure
I may
you
appear
will.
as a citizen one of these days.
Excellent. We would love to have you back. And welcome, Eric. We're happy to have you and look forward to getting to know you a little bit better. So, go ahead.
I just wanted to share, you, Ms. Harlinski, you've been awesome to work with. And sometimes you and I kind of go around a little bit, but you have our best interests at heart, and you've done a great job of taking care of the Parks and Recreation Department for years. And when it comes to institutional knowledge and whatnot, you know what's going on, and we really appreciate all the things you've done for our department. And we wish you the best in your retirement. It's well deserved, so thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And Eric, you got big shoes to fill.
I think he knows that.
Keep them in mind.
I guess one other thing, if my voice cracks at all today, it's feeling a little bit weak. I absolutely devastated it at Arrowhead Stadium yesterday, so please bear with me. Benny, did we have any public comment? Okay, no public comment. No minutes to approve at this time, even if we had a quorum. If you do want to see a replay of a meeting, they're all on our YouTube channel with the link provided here. So with that, we can hop into new items with Chester I. Lewis. Larry?
I'll go ahead and get started. Before we get going on that, here's on our second item. I printed this out. If anybody's interested in it, this is going to be the next item. So we got to scroll this down. It doesn't click since it's the PDF. Scroll back there. Yeah, that does too. Okay. All right, so we got a great presentation on Chester I. Lewis that we wanted to share with the park board and anybody else who's very interested in this. Armando, you'll probably really appreciate this. You're going to enjoy this one. So we've been working on this Chester I. Lewis project for almost 2 years. I recall in November it's going to be 2 years, first talking about how we're going to work on this project, knowing that the DO school is coming in next door, how we're going to support that, what we're going to do to make this park shine and be great. So over the past 2 years, I've learned a lot about Chester I. Lewis, and the more and more I learn, the more and more I get excited about this project for what he represents and the things that he did in our history in the African American community. So we have worked with a lot of different partners, and we've gone through several different renditions and ideas of what we're going to do in this park, and we finally come to one that we really think is going to stick. Well, it will stick. It better stick. We already have a contractor on board, and we'll talk a little bit more about this to help us out. We have hired art consultants. We've hired artists. We have our landscape architects on board. We put everything together, so we're really excited to move forward with this project. here's just a couple examples of some of the partners that we've been working with to make this happen, but we've been working with the stakeholders primarily that really have an impact on this, and that's the family of Chester I. Lewis and the NAACP. So we've been meeting with those two groups quite often. We wanted to meet with them first, make them feel like they were having really good engagement, and so we thought that was really important, and that's why we've actually made some different changes as we've gone through with the artists. And one thing I want to share up front, a lot of people are asking about the lunch counter at the park, and that lunch counter, we have even more grand plans for that lunch counter. It's going to move, and we're going to move it to another downtown park, and we're going to be working with the NAACP to even add more history and more context of the lunch counter, as well as all the things with the African American community. So a lot of work has been behind the scenes, and so we're getting to a point where we want to start executing, finishing up the design, and then getting into construction of the park. We have a deadline of getting this done by next summer, and we think that we have a good timeline for that. After this, there's one little housekeeping item that I want to do. Larry's going to head that up, but it's one small little piece that is working on this. So right now, the existing site, it looks a little torn up. It's a little, because we actually bought the building right next door, and we've actually torn out several of the items there. So it looks a lot different now, but when you see the conceptual drawings here in a few minutes, hopefully you'll be really impressed. As I mentioned, the lunch counter here is going to be moving, and we have some other things that are going to be happening as well. But the project vision, the whole idea behind all this was to create a gathering space that's going to support the community. It's going to be park-like. It's going to be a great park, but it's also going to have an opportunity for the students and the faculty over at the DO school to have a place for them to gather as well. But the bigger portion of this was really something that is really different than what we've done ever in the past, is really adding art into the project, and then also really having a historical portion of the park very much involved with the whole design. So this is really different than what we've done in the past with all of our parks. In the past, we had a green space, we put a tennis court or a baseball field, and we said, hey, that's a great park. But now our needs are a little bit different as our downtown is getting a little bit more sophisticated, and there's demands for more action in our parks. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Larry, and he'll take you through the rest of this.
Thank you, Troy. I just want to take you through some slides here. Going back to last summer, when we started getting into the meat of this process, we would have elected to do maybe like an open house setting where we could have had folks come in and set up a bunch of boards, have some dialogue and some engagement. But as it turns out, the pandemic had a big say in that. And so what the city decided to do was to put together an online survey so that the folks in the community could look at what we were wanting to do. And basically the engagement on this was to try to get a sense of the kind of park that people thought would be ideal to have in a downtown setting right here in the heart of our city. And so these are different examples, categories of park treatments that we asked the public to vote in on, and these are kind of the top vote getters of all the different examples. This first slide here gives you some ideas of just, in general, just some urban park examples, and these were the images that resonated the most with our survey. We probably had 15, 20 different examples, and these were the top 5. Also, how do we want to address seating? Seating is a very important aspect of park design, how you engage in the park. Here you can see, whether the seating were park benches or it's integrated, maybe it's in stairs, maybe it's elevated, maybe it's movable. I think you can see in NAFSCR we have a little bit of we have both. We have some some furniture that's permanent, and we have furniture that's movable. So the people that use this space can utilize it in a different, a lot of different ways. And so these were images that resonated with that survey and were top vote getters as well. Ground plane, how you embellish the floor plane, different textures, whether it be decorative paving, maybe it's wood decking, colored concrete. You see a couple slides here where there's artificial turf or natural turf. Just down the street from this park, I think you can see with Nafsker Park, we have that big flexible space that's utilized there, and I think it's been very well received by the public. And so here you see that that was highly desired in this survey as well. And last but not least, the lighting. Lighting is a very, very critical part of this project. As you know, Chester I. Lewis Park is a very small area. It's an urban area, lots of downtown or businesses and tall buildings and tall walls. So it's kind of got a cave-like feel to it. And so just trying to take a look at that. There's an urban tree canopy there currently. It's hard to see into. So visibility is a very important aspect of looking into the park. We wanted to address that. But then even from another perspective, we think that lighting can just really make this space incredibly dynamic and special in the evening. It could help us to illuminate maybe some of the artwork and just make it a very pleasant, bright place to be. And before I get started here, I just want to say a couple things. Our design team, Jeff Best, landscape architect with Law Kingdon, and Anthony Joyner is with us today as part of our design team. Anthony is our artist consultant with Elizabeth Stevenson, who is working with our featured artists. But just something to remember, this is in our downtown, this is the heart of our downtown corridor, and so this is really significant in terms of, if you think about, Douglas as being our kind of main east-west corridor. If you're looking all the way down to Old Town to Nafsker Park, this progression of places, we're wanting to create different places along this corridor. This is a really important node along a major pathway that leads to our river. And of course, eventually we want to do something special with our riverfront. We got Riverfront Stadium in Delano that's very taken off, as it speaks. So, but these ideas that you see today are conceptual. We feel like this is kind of the culmination, as Troy's mentioned, of a lot of work over the past months and weeks, and so this is kind of where we are. We feel fairly good about it, but we want to engage you as well. So, Jeff?
It's kind of like a football game. It's 4 quarters. I'm third quarter, by the way. Fourth quarter will be real interesting.
Right, always is with the Chiefs.
It is. So, like Larry said, we've been working on this for a while now. If you would have seen this about a year ago and seen this, it's night and day different. A lot of the parameters changed after we came up with the first solution, not least of which was the entry to the school. And that changed quite a bit. This is a much stronger design overall. I think it fulfills a lot more of the goals that we established early on. This is a small space. It's a unique space because we've got basically 3 walls all around us, and it's pretty tight. It's been a little dark as far as the shading. It's on the north side of a pretty tall building. It's got a low canopy of trees. So we really wanted to open it up throughout and really gain visibility from back to front. Or, well, I shouldn't even say back to front, from Douglas back to the Exchange Place. The other thing is that we're looking at is the alley improvements. We really are concentrating on that alley, not kind of as a forgotten space. A lot of times in urban areas you see that, but as a pedestrian space, as well as a place for food trucks to be. And we really were looking at all 3 of the building facades, these edges, if you will, and making those really part of the overall park. You can see here the new DO school entry, which of course is extremely important to the overall design, but the overall thought process behind this is pull people into and throughout the park, both from the south and from or basically from here from here back to the back, and vice versa, really. The angles are pretty dynamic throughout, and we really tried to encourage that on both sides, the east and the west side of this. The green space obviously is a pretty flexible space. That's the other part of this, is we really wanted to make it as flexible for larger groups, but also pretty comfortable for individual students who may be out here studying or eating lunch. And as you can see, this is, again, relatively small. We do have a little more sun, more than you would actually think, being on the north side of this building. So shade is still a consideration that we're looking at. Along Douglas, obviously you see these kind of walkways, but another part of this is this green space actually, it slopes down gently, again, kind of encouraging people to come, inviting them into that space. And it focuses on this spot right here. This is kind of an impromptu stage. It's not a real large scale stage, and it's never meant to be that. We had something planned for that originally, but after we kind of opened it up with the artists and having a dialogue with them, they had some ideas and some thoughts on that space, so we kind of pulled back and set that aside for them. Again, you can kind of see the entry to the DO school. This is the Athena building. It's a pretty large monolithic brick wall, not in the best of shape. This actually looks a whole lot better than it does in reality. We're standing proud of that a little bit with this structure. We kind of felt like we wanted to bring the scale of that wall down a little bit and kind of break up the monotony of that wall. So what you're seeing here is independent structures, standing proud of it. We've got some perforated panels, some green screen, possibly with some vines on it, and a little bit of green planting in through here along with the seating. Again, the focus is pushing more towards the center of the park. Originally we had some seating up here, but that space is really too narrow to do kind of independent movable seating and chairs. So this is kind of the solution that we went with on that. You know, another kind of shot from Douglas back. You can kind of see this, again, strong spine angling across here, and then the entry of the school. The entry of the school is just a little bit elevated above that walk. It's about 4 inches, so it's raised up just a little bit off that ground plane. That was another thing that we were really looking at, is kind of changing the ground plane a little bit in spatial definition throughout. If anyone is curious how students were actually getting into the school, this is actually the bridge that'll be there. There's an internal stairway and elevator. Again, a couple more shots. Seating, we really kind of wanted to look at seating in a lot of different ways, and not just a bench to sit on, but maybe it's a space where you can lay down. Maybe you can lay on your stomach to do some studying, or kind of sprawl out a little bit. Again, we really wanted to give people a lot of options as far as seating goes, and find their own way. You could sit on these steps, down in here, and then on the western side. This is probably a little bit, I guess I've always been referring to it as more the quiet side, or a quieter side of this park. We'll see if that's what happens in reality, but we've got some seating over here and some planting. It's a little greener on this side as well. We really, when we laid this out, we didn't want that, we knew that we had a small space. We knew that really at the end of the day we were laying the groundwork or the framework of this park to get people in, get them around, make it comfortable for people and different uses. But we also felt like the art was going to probably be what really made this park. And that's why we were probably a little bit reserved with what we were doing. And I really think that the art really responds well to the overall park design, and vice versa, to where I don't think you can really pull one out without the other. I think they really can, support each other really well. I think with that, I'll turn it over to Anthony. And the fourth quarter begins.
How's everybody doing? I'm no Kobe Bryant, so I may not be able to pull the fourth quarter like he does, but I'll do what I can. So my name's Anthony Joyner. I'm one of the art consultants for this. And when we came into this project, I was really excited to know who it is that we were going to be talking about, and dive in and learn a bit more about him. So the first thing that both me and Elizabeth began to do was do a little bit of research. First on parks that were already here in Wichita, that were already dedicated to people, and then nationwide. And we noticed something that I think you know, especially as we advance with technology, something that we need to continue to pay attention to, and that's the fact that usually a park that's dedicated to someone has like this one-liner, right? So when you go to a park that's dedicated to Dr. King, it's usually really dedicated to one of his speeches. Or when you go to a park that's dedicated to anyone else historical, it's like one moment in their life. And that's what this whole park is about. And in addition to that, outside of possibly a little plaque that's sitting somewhere, you have to hope that someone is there to actually give you the information. And we wanted this to be different. We looked at this as an opportunity to do something a bit different. In our choice of artists, we ended up going with Matthew Mazzota and Ella Monique Bacchus. Ella is an artist, a local artist who's done a lot of amazing projects, not only here in Wichita, but also in Chicago, where she's from. And then Matthew Mazzota is a national artist. He's done a lot of different projects throughout the United States and then some international as well. And what we wanted to look at after we did the research on the park was like, who exactly was Chester Lewis and what did he do? Because most people, when you think Chester Lewis, you think the Dockham Sit-In, and that's where the story ends. But this was a very dynamic man that did a whole lot, not only that affected Wichita, but that affected our entire nation. And one of those things was desegregation of restaurants. And that's where the Dockham Sit-In comes in, right? Where he kind of mentored those kids and helped with them. But there was so much more that he did as well. You know, his lawsuits and all the different fights that he had. He continued to fight on so many different levels. But the reason for that wasn't just because he wanted black people the opportunity to sit in a restaurant, but because of the fact that just being able to sit in that restaurant and be involved with that local business does so much more from the community. It allows community gathering areas, shared cultural experience, and transmissions of cultural norms. And all of those things are extremely important when it comes to building a community. Desegregation of public pools. This is something also that helped with our youth. And it ended up leaking into so many other things. You see, once you open up the pools and the kids are allowed to play together in the pools, then that also affects the parks and other gathering areas where children are able to connect outside of school. Desegregation of aircraft companies is something that I think was really major. He ended up fighting Boeing, suing Boeing several times and continuing to fight. And again, it wasn't just about black people being able to get jobs as aircraft assembly mechanics. It was about getting access to higher wages. So by fighting with Boeing and opening up that particular area, it ends up spreading to other jobs because they had to be more competitive at that point, now that we're allowed access to one of the highest payers here in the community. And then again, once that happens at Boeing, the other aircraft companies also had to follow suit. So those are different trickle-down effects that he has. And I'm not going to bore you with going through every single one of these, but it kind of gives you the idea of where we were going with this. When we searched for who he was and what he did, we wanted to know in depth who he was and the people that he affected. And so this is where Matthew began. And one of the biggest things that Chester Lewis affected was the Fair Housing Ordinance. And you're going to learn some interesting facts about that in this, because being able to live in a home that is in an area that's safe and that has access to the right schools for your family. We've all seen the research where it says a kid in a stable home performs better and they end up being better later in life. So it was something that for Chester Lewis was really important for him to really tackle. And he and his family went through a lot just in order to get this through. Here, Matthew was looking at what it looks like to not only have that central focus of the home, but also that idea of amplification, because Chester Lewis was such a great orator. He could stand in front of any crowd. He was very charismatic and would say exactly what he wanted to say to get people on board and to get people to join his cause. And so that's what this particular figure is about. And if you notice on the bottom right, you see words in there. That's kind of looking at the words that Chester Lewis said while looking toward the sky. And that's something that we thought was really, really interesting. But that's just one of the designs that Matthew came up with during the conceptual. And this is a second design where each one of these kind of little sit-ins here actually serve a purpose. You can turn in one and whisper something that then the voice carries over into the one across from you. So you're able to kind of tell these secret messages. And these, because of the way these are built, they kind of carry that voice. And we thought that was something that was very interesting. And this third design was one that a lot of people really resonated with. And when we talked to the family, again, one of the other things that we noticed with a lot of the parks was that the families weren't usually involved, especially not heavily in the beginning stages. And so we made sure from the very beginning that we continued to talk to the family and let them be involved in how we were going to be memorializing someone that they loved and cared about so much, because his daughter and granddaughter still actually live right here in Wichita and are part of this community. So when we brought them in, this is something that they really connected with. And it's the idea of you still have that central focal point of the house, but then that roof begins to open. And then it ends up in kind of that stance of praise. And so it means essentially the sky is the limit. You've got wide open access to whatever you want because of what this man has done to provide this access for you. And so this is kind of a more detailed version of that particular thing. So we started in kind of thinking about, okay, how many of these do we want? Because these would essentially become the kind of placeholders for more detailed work that we would provide as well. And that's what you see here, kind of the bare bones of what that would look like. And this is how this would all come together, kind of the additional scope. Again, you have that central home that's here at the beginning, and then you start to open. And we're looking at several different things here. This is essentially how the more detailed work would go inside of these. But then also we're looking at what would it look like if the lights were actually connected to this, to where it would highlight the work and also provide light and safety there in the park in the evening times as well. And this is essentially what the site plan would be. Essentially, again, this is still the preliminary design phase, so some of this may change just a little bit, but this gives you a basic understanding. You have the street out this way, and people would be able to look in and see different angles of the park, and then see a lot of different pictures on each of these kind of items here. And each of these would be made out of brushed stainless steel. And he's also indicated the possibility of kind of those pictures that you will see which you'll see more here in a bit, being made with perforated stainless steel. And this is what it would look like with light, especially in the evening time. And another thing that we talked about even from the very beginning was not just doing plop art, to where the art that we brought in would kind of be just sitting on top of the beautiful design work that was already there, but more something that was more integrated, something that when you go to this park, you're actually experiencing the entire park. And so Matthew began looking at what the potential options would be in regards to seating and how we could make it to where the seating would correlate with the artwork and the park itself. And these were just a few of those options that he's looking at. And this is potentially what it could look like once the artwork is in it. And now we'll talk a little bit about Ella. Now, Ella, we have the initial design, right? And you get fair housing and how that is affected and everything with that particular part. But there's still so much more to his story that we want to be able to tell. And that's where Ella comes in, to provide the more direct pictures and the more detail. And if you notice, she has things like Adinkra symbols in there, which you could also see on the 9th Street project, where they have that on the different bus stops and different things like that. So that's a way to where this connects. But also there are several different pictures here that you'll see that kind of provide even more detail into Chester Lewis and his life. In regards to how to provide that information, we began to look at what it would look like to have augmented reality and virtual reality, or even QR codes connected. So imagine yourself walking into this park, kind of in this scene that you see here. And while you're standing there and you see all of these pictures, you start to think, okay, who is this guy and what does this have to do with him? That's where things like augmented reality would come in. So how can we connect this with technology to where people would be able to, let's say, scan one of these pictures and actually hear more details and information to learn more about this dynamic person? Each of these symbols we're currently looking at as potentially having QR codes to where people could scan these and also get some information from it. But each of these symbols themselves also have meaning that directly indicate who Chester Lewis was and tell you bits and pieces about his personality and the different things that he's done. This one, for example, is one that I think is very important, and that's defense and housing. A house with the fence is actually, they consider that to be safety, right? You keep the good things in, the bad things out. That's what that fence is all about. So that's something that he fought, and he was considered that safety net for so many different people. When you talk to people throughout the community that connected with Chester Lewis, even the people that were kids at the time, they'll say, well, I didn't use them, but my mom did, or my dad did. Someone in my family actually used his services. And what he provided for the community was something that was far deeper than just a standard attorney. And there was several different stories that were passed on to us from people that felt like they were mistreated and literally ran to Chester Lewis so that they could get their due justice. And each one of these pillars, here we talk about desegregation of restaurants. And what Ella is looking at here is, when you think of desegregation of restaurants, because of the fact that people do think of the Dockham Sit-In, how do we integrate that into the park? Well, usually when you look up the Dockham Sit-In, you get 1 to 2 pictures, and these are a couple of the pictures here. But there's actually a lot more. The families and people that were actually involved with the Dockham Sit-In have more pictures that they've donated to the African American Museum, but they don't really have the space to hang them all. So what Ella is looking at potentially doing is creating a collage that recreates this picture with all of those other pictures, to where people from the community and those families that were involved in this could walk up close to this and see those small individual pictures. And then when you stand far off, you see that iconic image that represents the Dockham Sit-In itself. With desegregation of pools, she's also looking at creating kind of an optical illusion. So what does it look like to have this particular type of glass to where when you stand next to this panel, you can actually you can see it and it feels as though you could actually be in the water. But for each one of these, they will also have the Adinkra symbols connected as well, to where, again, you're able to get more information. What does he have to do with pools? And you can go and actually receive that information right there while you're standing in front of this. For desegregation of aircraft companies, again, as we talked about earlier, it opens the door for so much, but for him, one man fighting against Boeing, can you imagine how crazy that must have been? So this image within itself is one that Ella is looking at, because that silhouette that you see down in front of the aircraft would actually be Chester Lewis. There was something that was quoted to us from him where he said, it doesn't matter how many lawyers they have. I have access to the exact same laws and the exact same law books. They can come with 6 or 7 if they want. I'll stand there front and center and fight. And that's something that I think is very important, because for here, once you actually have that silhouette and him kind of facing off against this giant aircraft, that must have been what it felt like. Him standing in front of a giant and fighting to make sure that we were able to get our rights. Desegregation of government agencies, one thing that Ella was looking at in particular was education. So Chester Lewis was really big on education, to the point where he told his daughter, look, I will pay for your first degree, but from there, you're on your own. I'm going to make sure that you get the education that is necessary, so that from there you can take those tools that you've been provided to continue to build. And if you see the success of his family now, you know that his ideals were true. And so he fought, and you can look at several different newspaper articles where he went public fighting for different schools and making sure that the schools were provided the access and supplies that they needed. And so what Ella is thinking about doing here is getting different kids from the local community, just from right here in Wichita, to create images based on the education that she's providing them on Chester Lewis. And then she will actually bring those images together. And if you see this image of Dr. King here, Those different images would make that particular one, and that would be of Chester Lewis instead of Dr. King, though. Again, the Fair Housing Ordinance. Something that a lot of people didn't know, and that I didn't know when I came into this, was that Wichita was the third biggest redlined city in the United States. It was over 80% redlined. All of this that you see in red over here on the right was considered hazardous because of the people that lived there. And the green was what was considered safe. So the African Americans here in the community and so many other immigrants and people of color were relegated to these neighborhoods in the pink and the red. That's something that I think is very significant to our history and something that's very important. And so that's something that Ella wanted to put into this. But in addition to it just serving significance on its own, this detail here will allow people to go in and look at their community, look at their neighborhood here on this map, and look at the effects that this had on where it is today. Whether this community is being uplifted, whether it's now being built, or whether there are still issues that are going on that we can then date back to this particular era. And another concept that she's come up with was actually placing this as well on the stage to where it would be something that people, again, that's kind of the focal point of this entire park. So when you're standing on that stage, you get to get a more abstracted version of this map as well. And the final piece that Ella was looking at was his personal life. So often when we look at these huge figures that are larger than life, we forget that they were people just like us. So how do we inspire the next generation to follow along with them if they're just seen as giants and that's it? So we've talked to, again, the family and so many other people that were connected with Chester Lewis. And we started looking for images of him, and something that I found was very important was, just like with the doc I'm sitting in, you can't Google very many images of Chester Lewis. He had 2 to 3 images, maybe. Most of the images that are kept of him are with the family or at KU, where he donated all of his work. Everything that has his writing and everything like that on it, from him organizing the Young Turks to so many other things, are right there at KU, but none of it's digital. It's all in boxes. And it's one of the most used things that they have in the archive, but still, one mistake and all of that information is gone. So that's another reason that having something digital here in this park was so important to us, so that as we move forward, we can continue, like, this is somewhere where this information can live, and it's less of a risk of this information being lost or forgotten. These are different images, and again, this is just the concept, so these would be, drawn in the artist's own light, but this is kind of the images that she's looking at right now, and we'll continue to expand on this as we move toward the final design. All right, so I'm going to turn this back over to Larry now.
Real quickly, I just want to show you this. Just kind of gives you an overview of our budget. It's about $1.7 million project. $300,000 was used for property acquisition and demolition, $900,000 for the park budget itself, but this last number you see is pretty significant, $500,000 in public art for the budget. This is unprecedented for a public project, and in that it's in the center of our city, it just really, I think, has an opportunity to be raised at a whole new level. And so we've first of all, we want to thank the Park Foundation for really stepping forward and starting that process. And we've got about 5 other institutions in town, primarily banks, that have stepped up to help us with that. So $100,000 of this is from park TIF funds that is dedicated for the park art. So that's kind of it. And any questions or comments?
Any questions for the team here? I've got several.
I've got questions. I've always got questions. I'm really impressed. I mean, that's a really impressive piece for the core of Wichita. It's absolutely fantastic. So thank you for how thoughtful everything was and addressing all the stakeholders. Just the drumbeat that I've got is that if we want to make this a walkable, accessible community feature, do we have some kind of assurance or some kind of a plan, some kind of an option? Just thinking back to what I've heard people complain about NAFSCR is lack of accessible restrooms. the place, if we're going to have food trucks, if we're going to want people to, we want to encourage gathering, we want to encourage people to eat there or to have celebrations. I can envision all kinds of performances and many different options, but if we do it without accessible public amenities, I think it diminishes people's ability to fully utilize and activate the space. And I think that a possible workaround, if this could be worked out with the DO school, is to get some kind of a public access that it's not expected to make a purchase or make some kind of, it's a secure area that they could have access to. Just want to know if that's something that has been considered, just because that's going to be my constant drumbeat, is how is it, if we want people to come to the parks and utilize our parks as fully as possible, can they also have their human needs met?
So I'll comment on that first. This is going to be programmed differently than NAFSCR Park.
Okay.
There's no reason why we should duplicate what we have going on over at NAFSCR Park. So the issue that we have over at NAFSCR Park, I think that's a little bit separate, and that's something that we should be addressing, not within this context. So like I mentioned, and actually we talked about this is a small park. To really put any kind of amenities in there would really detract from the size and square footage of the park. That was one of the reasons also for NAFSCR Park, but that's another discussion. So the programming that we have here will probably be a lot shorter, a lot smaller, and we have a food truck there, probably be just one food truck, probably on a rotating basis, probably not every single day, and not every single day of the year, because obviously we don't do anything in the wintertime. So I understand your concern, and it's something that is an afterthought, and was actually a pre-thought in regards to NAFSCR Park. That was a big discussion way before, but there's a lot of other reasons why that didn't occur. So at this point in time, I'm going to say probably not going to be looking at any kind of public restrooms or amenities in there in regards to that, because I don't think the programming is really going to be that impactful to make that happen. So I'm going to look at Mr. Best, if you have anything. Did I miss anything, or anything else you want to cover?
No, I think that the only other part of that conversation is going back to the budget too. You put a public restroom in here, you're talking about a solid $350,000 to $500,000 investment. And we obviously get our pretty straps.
And just to be clear, I'm not looking to add to that. I'm saying, are there other options that
Yeah.
could be considered? I just want to make voice to that, and that's something that's a longer-term discussion.
Sure. The other thing too is we have people that are going to be coming downtown to shop, to go to the restaurants, to go other places within downtown, to go to the movies. All those locations have facilities for those type of situations.
Sure.
Yeah. That was it? Oh, you
I got other stuff later. This is just
Okay.
Just the warm-up. Can you talk a little bit about the flow of the food trucks and how that would look? I think I saw in the rendering, maybe on the back side there, on the south side of the park.
Yeah, what we're looking at actually is we're going to bring that food truck in from the west and actually back, or come back out the west, because that bridge is going to be pretty low. Just to protect that's kind of the logistics of it, and that's another reason why we're kind of looking at one truck, not a gang of them back
Gotcha.
there. I mean, just because logistically it's challenging, but we can make one. I think it worked pretty well.
That alleyway is going to be one of the access points, but we want to keep that alleyway as pedestrian friendly as possible. There's going to be a lot of people walking up and down and around that area, so we didn't want to put the food truck going through the park. That's going to be really, really difficult as well. But the only vehicle that we anticipate would be a service vehicle and then a food truck to go up and down that alleyway.
Okay. I'm really glad that we engaged the family as well, and that was going to be one of my points, is that we make sure that, you know, we highlight Chester's accomplishments, and I'm really glad that, you know, you shared that, Mr. Joyner, and you know, that was going to be my big thing. I'm not a huge artist. I like, you know, pretty pictures and everything, so you know, I'm a little bit unbiased in that regard. But as long as we highlight his life and allow for a potentially educational experience for anybody that goes to the park, that's a huge deal, so.
What's really cool about this is this design accomplishes something that we really wanted to do and avoid the plop art, just putting a piece of sculpture or putting his statue in place. This is all integrated to the feel of the park. And this is way different than anything that we've done in any of our parks, which is pretty exciting. So,
Is our thought process, you briefed us a little bit on what you look for in the programming and everything. Are we looking at this big picture, high level, more for the students of the DO school, or is it going to be open to the public?
it's definitely going to be open to the public, and another big partner is going to be the Kansas African American Museum, working with them on a lot of different educational components. I've gotten interest from Hutch already because they have a park. They're not going to do what we're doing because ours is super, super special. They can't even come close to what we're going to do. But they do have a park, and they do have a monument, and they want to be a part of this as well. And with the electronic media, they can do that pretty easily, so that's pretty exciting. Working with the library, there's a library app that already has some information. We did our first open streets. The library app was opened so people walking up and down Douglas could see different things on Douglas. Kind of the same idea, but excuse me. But working with the library is going to have a huge impact, I think. So those are going to be some of the major educational portions of it. Obviously, working with the school, we'll have some opportunities for them to put some programs on. We want to share some of their ideas and thoughts, and they're going to work with us on doing some great stuff there too. So,
One last thing, I just want to confirm that everybody's on board with this location, hopefully soon a destination. Suda, obviously, I would imagine you are, but I just want to confirm that, that the NAACP and the rest of the stakeholders, the family, is okay with this location.
most definitely. That's what took so long, longer than I expected. But we did run all the traps, and we did go through all the right opportunities for it, engagement with all the right people, and I think we got plenty of support. So I think a lot of people are very, very excited about it.
Were there other locations considered?
Not really. This was, the opportunity to partner with the school, and it's not very often that you get $1 million TIF.
Yeah.
We weren't going to get that anywhere else. So once we saw this, and this was something that we had talked about 5 or 6 years ago. I remember having an event there and saying, well, gosh, we really need to get more people here. We need to activate this park even more. And we tried, and we did some different things. But I think this takes it to the next level.
Okay. And I,
It's important to note as well that the park had been dedicated to Chester Lewis, right? With the NAACP already. So that I just wanted to do as well.
Okay.
Something that's already dedicated.
I understand that the geography is very important to honoring somebody like this. Obviously, with the sit-in at Dockham, it wouldn't make much sense moving them far away from where it actually took place.
Yeah, the Dockham sit-in was actually a block away. And this was actually the original Woolworths. A lot of people get that kind of confused, but the intent of honoring him nearby is exactly what you're talking about.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's all I got. Oh, one last thing. Artificial turf, obviously.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
I was just curious, Armando, what were your thoughts, if mind me putting you on the spot?
I don't know, maybe I should set up for the sound council meeting. In a week.
Okay.
We'll be hearing. That's great. I mean, we've heard about this for a minute, so I've been very curious and eager to see what the progress is.
Okay, well, I'm glad you're here to see it. So,
See the artists, got a couple of weeks to think about it, bring some concerns.
So to wrap it up a little bit, timeline, like I mentioned, we're trying to get everything done by next summer. Design-wise, we're trying to get things done in the next couple of weeks or a month or so. It's going to be a tight timeline, but we're pretty excited to make that happen. As Larry had noted, the Wichita Parks Foundation made a very large donation. Several local businesses downtown are making a donation. It's all going through the Wichita Parks Foundation and then going to this project. Downtown Wichita has been a huge partner on this as well. We did get $100,000 from the Arts Council to make part of that $500,000. So a lot of moving parts, a lot of people in this one. This one has been pretty difficult but exciting. Just makes once we get to the end, it's going to make it that much more satisfying.
Sounds like a lot of community involvement, so that's,
Yep.
that's a good thing. I guess, have we seen any long lead times on materials or abnormally high prices? Yeah.
The answer is yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So-
And you know, there is some contingencies in case we have
Okay.
some other pitfalls to take care of.
Sure.
So in general, I'd like to, if we had a quorum, I'd ask you to vote, but you know, if you guys have any questions, you can always let me know. And just in general, I'm just hoping to get your guys' support.
Sure. Guys, do you guys have any more questions? Phil, Chris? Well, with that, I would, obviously we can't move or vote or anything, but I would strongly suggest that we move forward with this.
Good. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Second.
Fair enough, yeah.
So the second part of this, and this is what this sheet is for, we have some housekeeping to do. And I'm going to let Larry get up there and start this off. But before we go, hold on one second. Before you move that. So this is a good picture of what we're looking at. And we're going to put this up on the overhead. What we're looking at is this whole area right here. And what happened was, as we were going through design, we're putting 2 or 3 pieces of puzzles together. And right now the puzzles don't fit. We have a puzzle piece that's a little bit bigger than what we expected. So what we're going to be doing is more procedural, and we want to make sure you guys are aware of it because we're going to take this to council probably in a week or 2. It's involving some land acquisition that we're going to be selling, so we can make sure we fit this in there. I think we're talking about a total of about 150 square feet, which isn't much. So.
Thank you, Troy. This is an architectural plan of the new DO school entrance. And as Troy mentioned, if you'll focus your attention on the areas that are highlighted in that yellow color, you'll see the 71.3 square foot on the north end, and then along the side there's some square footage there as well. So just to kind of give you a sense of the storyline behind this, when we started this process, you know, you kind of take your best guess at to what you think you're going to need land-wise to make something like this work. And as we work through the architects with the architecture portion of it and with our developer, you know, there's things that come up with ADA access, the right amount of space for them to have something that's really functional and dynamic. You know, we start out with this kind of rectangular configuration on the site, and you can see those numbers delineated 28 feet wide by 30 feet in depth. And so that's where we started. And so obviously to make something more dynamic and more interesting and contemporary looking that has some sort of relationship to not only the park, but its relationship to the street from Douglas. This is a really important economic development project for the city of Wichita. I think, you know, as Troy mentioned, up to 600 students. I mean, this is going to be a real incubator for economic development in this area. So we're really excited about the developer bringing this to us and working with the city to make this happen. But in lieu of that, there's a little bit of encroachment here. And so this is more like a housekeeping item to try to make sure we cross all our T's and dot our I's. So there's about 148 square footage of just inside the building envelope that needs to be addressed in terms of financial sale, acquisition. And then this area that you see in kind of that light turquoise color, that's the area that is needed for permanent easement. Obviously, when you're building something like this, you need spread footings and you need the technical withdrawal to support the building, and so the engineers have to go beyond the building fabric beneath the actual park. So this doesn't change anything from the park's perspective. This is all, as Troy suggested, it's a big puzzle that we're trying to put together and trying to make it dovetail so it looks nicely. We want the school entrance to look nice. We want the park to look nice. Everything blends together. So that's really what this is about. So in order for that to happen, there's a permanent easement that the developer will have to purchase for that. It's not the same valuation as the actual cost of the building, but there is a valuation for that. I'm going to ask John Philbrick maybe to fill in some details on that. He's our real estate expert. We've been working with Sue. I see she's here today, and appreciate her coming. So, or Mark, whichever.
What we've got is, Larry said, we've got some overlaps. Originally, the property ownerships were rectangular in nature. As the property was developed and made more interesting, we have some small overlaps onto small pieces of city property. The yellow pieces will actually be developed with the building. We intend to sell those to the developer at a price that equates to a number that we bought land from the developer earlier. We bought the northerly part of lot 125 for about $118 a foot. It was a developed site, and they removed the building, and then we paid what they'd paid for it. And they're going to pay us that same amount for the land in yellow. Again, as Larry said, the turquoise area is footings. It's going to be subsurface development. The surface will still be available to be used for the park, for the artwork, and so on. We intend to sell that at a lesser price. Our experience when we're on the other side buying for the city is that subsurface easements run about 30% of the fee value. We have discussed that with the developer. The developer is fine with that number. And so between the two, we're going to end up with a total price of around $28,000. We'll go to council, get permission to make the transaction. The money will be returned to the project, so ultimately it'll go back into the TIF and into the park. So, but like Larry said, it's just a housekeeping item, but we want you all to be aware of it in case it pops up that there's a transaction going to council. One, let you know what we were doing and what it was.
Any questions for John or Troy? I think, I don't want to use the word minuscule, but for such a small portion of land and for such a transformative project, I think this is a pretty simple decision. I would suggest that we move forward, do whatever it takes, take it to council. And of course, if we can help in any way, of course, let us know.
Appreciate that. Just wanted to be transparent and then also get your support. Anytime we take anything to council, they always ask the question, did you take this to the park board? And so now I can say I did. Thank you.
Right. Good. Good on Chester Eye. Excellent. Move forward then. Thanks for everybody. Yep. Thanks to everybody who came.
So the next item we have is in regards to the mural over at atzarentis, and we wanted to look at possibly putting a sign up there. And so we have Armando. He's here since he worked on the project. I think we do have a...
Yeah, there's another electronic copy of it. Well, they have, I can just go over here.
I don't think we got this to put up there, but Armando did provide this handout so he can talk to you guys about it. And I'll let you take that.
Okay, perfect, thank you. All right, well, hello everyone. My name is Armando Minjares, and I am here as the director of Horizontes Project. This presentation might be much shorter and underwhelming than the previous one, but that's okay.
It's important.
It is important. So we visited with Troy about this, and he suggested that I bring this to the board. You might be aware of a large mural painted on the grain elevator on 21st and Broadway area. And we had been planning to have some sort of signage, interpretive signage that would be educational to really tell the story of the large mural. There's over 12 characters that are in that piece of art that are from the neighborhood. And we really want to tell the story. There were another 19 murals that were painted in addition to the big one that we also want to give people a chance to find. All of this has been living in our website, and we get people constantly messaging us about where to find them, what they're about. So we really felt like we needed something out in the public that could be easily accessible at all times, and also a place that we can send people to. We planned to do this a couple of years back, but with COVID, everything was delayed up until now. So now the plan is to have it done hopefully by the end of the year. We looked at different areas where this sign could be housed, and we ended up going back to Nomar Plaza. It's just such an iconic place. It's programmed, typically it's programmed. We've had events there, and it's a physical location that we can send people to pretty easily. In addition to that, from the plaza, you can actually see part of the grain elevator. You can't see the art because the art faces east, and the plaza is on the west side. However, you're able to see the actual grain elevator. So we saw that as a positive. In thinking about what this sign should look like, we arrived at this idea. There's a couple examples of inspirations that we looked at, where you basically have a transparent surface, plexiglass or some other kind of acrylic material that can have the outline of the grain elevator that you see in the background line up with the image on the sign. And the sign itself will have, again, images of the mural, tell the story of the characters, and as well as the other murals. There's a map that we developed that will be on here. We want to have a little area where we can have like paper pamphlets that people can take if they need to. Really an interactive piece in more than one way. And we don't, at this point, we're working on the final designs. We really wanted to make sure that all the stakeholders were on board with this before we moved with creating spending the time and money to create an actual design. But yeah, we've reached out to Empower Evergreen, and since it looks like they might be the ones that will be using the plaza, managing the plaza, right? It's been kind of a limbo since for the last 2-3 years, but it looks like Evergreen will be that place. So we met with them, they're on board with this. We kind of walked the area, figure out where would be a good location. So if you look at the map, there's the southeast corner of the plaza where there's the big Nomar sign. It would be right on the east side of that sign. It will refine a good location where you can see the grain elevator in the background and have the sign line up with it. It's visible from 21st Street, from Broadway. There's enough space where you're not impeding pedestrian traffic. So it's get its own little spot, right? That it doesn't feel like it's in the way, but you can still interact with it. And so yeah, we wanted to, like I said, bring this to you and get any feedback and get you on board with it.
Thanks, Armando.
Yeah.
Any questions, anything you want to add, Troy?
So from a staff perspective, we're extremely supportive of this. It's not just a regular sign, which is really kind of cool. And I don't know if you guys have caught wind of some changes. A lot of things are dealing with art, lots of art stuff.
Yep.
So from a staff perspective, we would just set up a quick MOU, and because Armando has suggested that they would pay for it and maintain it, we would put that in an MOU, and it should be pretty simple.
Yep, the sign itself is designed to be minimal work to install it, other than bolting it to the ground. We would cover all the expenses for production and installment. It's already funded, fully funded. So really it's a matter of getting everyone on board and then get a final design figured out and get it to production. We really want to move with it quickly because we really want to be done by the end of the year. And we wouldn't hold for 16 months, and we just want to be done with it.
I hear you.
Yep.
Well, I'm extremely supportive of this as well. If you guys have any questions or comments?
No, this looks great. Congratulations.
Yep.
Awesome, great. Well, that was easy. Thanks, y'all. Yeah, and we'll try. I'll work with you then to work
Yeah.
in the MOU.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to work on that this week and get it to you by Friday because we're going to be out of town next week.
Okay.
That way you can jump on it. So we'll get that done, and we'll send it to law, make sure that they think it's okay.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Armando.
Yeah.
And I appreciate and thinking outside the box. It's not just a sign. Yeah, that's why we have artists. Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing it. Okay, finance update. Emma, you ready?
Yeah, perfect. Okay, I'm gonna make my really short and sweet. It's very similar information as before, just new data. As of end of August, I have all revenue listed. We are sitting about $1 million, which is 50% of the goal from finance from the city. And as far as where revenue goes, the same layout, and I have everything spelled out. As far as percentage goes, it's very similar as of last month because it's summer. It's similar activity, revenue channels, and park maintenance, and the admin as well. So it's all listed in there, same as last month. And then we have gotten questions about comparisons. So I've been putting this every month by the end of the month, August, for the past 2 years, including this year, and do a comparison. And similar as last month, the revenue has gone up since 2020 because the pandemic is not quite yet as 19 because limitation on capacity, but it's a way better year than 2020 for sure. As far as expense goes, we're pretty much on track. 62% by the end of August is really well in budget, and that's very important. As we discussed thoroughly in the past, we're part of the budget process, so we want to make sure we're spending within budget. And as far as golf goes, overall we're sitting at about 3.5, with Auburn Tech's doing really well so far, and then Sim is as well, and then last is Mac, but it's still way better than last year. As far as expense goes, all listed in here as well. It's about 2.5, which is why P&L we're sitting at about 187,000. One thing I think we got a question about, which is why I put in here, is the admin or the personnel changes. I did pull admin data last month, personnel for admin last month, but this month I'm pulling the personnel for the entire golf division. As you can see, compared 2021 to 19, since 20 is really the off year, we are underspending on personnel. So probably take that into consideration when it comes to P&L for end of this year. But I think that's the most common asked questions is the personnel changes. But other than that, that's it, short and sweet.
Any questions for Emma? Thank you, Emma.
Thanks.
Communication.
I don't think I had any items to take up to the city manager and to council from the park board, so I don't have anything to report. Other than all these projects, we're going to be moving forward to council rather soon, so pretty excited about that.
We're going to skip the recreation update, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Golf update and first tee.
First tee, I don't really have much to report on first tee because we really haven't had much going on. I know they have been using our facilities, and first tee's been doing a lot of instruction, but I don't have any data, stats, information.
Okay. Do you guys have any questions about, did we update everybody last month on the RFP process? Do you guys have any questions about that, how that's going?
I can give some updates now.
Okay.
So what we ended up doing was we put out the request for proposal for third-party operator of our golf courses. We ended up getting 7 agencies that had interest, and so that was the first. It was a 2-part proposal, and so we just wanted to see who was interested, and they demonstrated their credentials, and so all 7 of them met the standards for the credentials to operate our golf courses. So the second part was part B, where we asked for their financials. What's their proposal? How are they going to do this? What's a transition plan? Just all the details that we needed so we can evaluate that. We should be getting that on October 15th, I do believe. No, it might be a little bit sooner than that. I should have brought the calendar with me. But it's within the next 3 weeks that we should be getting all the proposals. So from that, we will have the committee review that. And the committee consists of 2 of the staff members from my department, somebody from purchasing, somebody from finance, and somebody from the law department. And then we are going to have 4 citizens. Mr. Fonestock is going to be on the panel. We have 1 member from the Golf Advisory Committee, and that is Michael Ward. And then we're going to have 2 folks from the golf community, and one of them is Anthony Jenkins, and the other one is going to be Greg Ferris, who's been very involved with a lot of our activities in the past. So they know how to really evaluate and take a look at what the proposals are going to be. From that, we could be interviewing 7. If they all do great, we could be interviewing 3 or 4. So they'll be shortlisted. And then from that, each one of these agencies will come out and do a presentation. And from that, we'll make a judgment as to whether, first of all, how they compare and how they stack of what we're doing currently and internally with our staff. If it's actually more beneficial to go to a third-party operator. And then from that, we will determine which third-party operator, if that's the case. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
And we did have a new member join us on the Golf Advisory Committee this past week. It's Phil's appointee. Help me on the name. Cody Hollister. I should remember that because that's an NFL player. So here I am talking about football again. Okay, all
What
good
was
there.
the GAC's feeling about this so far? They were hesitant in the beginning. Are they more open to the idea of it?
I think, at the beginning, and I say the beginning, was that back in June or July, when First Tee first came to us and gave a joint meeting. There was some hesitancy, there was some pullback. I think, it's a matter of, just like anything, informing people of, what our, path forward is, the best path forward. And certainly, we wanted to clear some, or at least make it more transparent, a more transparent process. And this is what we're doing with the RFP process. Of course, we don't have to accept any bids, and I think, people are starting to come come around to that. They think if we go out to an RFP, then we're selling it off immediately. So, it's just a matter of informing people.
I just want to make it clear that there was some interest from some members of the GAC a year and a half ago, that we should have a third-party operator, that a third-party operator could operate our courses better than we can. And so that was actually the catalyst for a lot of this. Was, if you go back in history, wasn't just department's decision to do that, but we did get some interest, and that was relayed through several meetings. From that's when we came up with the idea of partnering with First Tee. So they came together with a proposal, and we took it to the Golf Advisory Committee and obviously to the Park Board. And that's when the request was, hey, why are we just going with one? There was only one opportunity here to look at it, and now we have 7. So with that request was, hey, if we're going to do a request for a proposal, let's open it up to everybody. So that's what we did. So.
Good.
All right.
Park maintenance and forestry.
So we really don't have much else to update on that, other than, a couple things I want to go back, talk about the budget. So we're looking at, right now, we're in the black by $900,000, closer to $1 million, which is great. And that is simply because we really cut back on our labor staff, partly because we weren't able to hire anybody because of COVID all the way through until June. And when we got the green light to do that, it takes a while for that machine to actually start hiring, and we're still trying to hire folks. We have a lot of positions that aren't filled yet. So it's a little misleading in regards to that revenue, but that is really good news that we are in the black, and it's really good news that our rounds are up. So we're really proud and excited about that. Kind of the same thing in regards to the department budget. So we definitely peak in regards to expenses in June and July and August. So we've gotten past that, and I think that's a little bit beyond 60% of the month, or 60% of the year. We're at 60%, and as we go to the downside, the spending really kind of drops off. So we've done a really, really good job of staying underneath our budget. A little disappointed in the recreation revenue. I thought with the new pools, we'd really see some more revenue, but we still had a lot of classes that were canceled, a lot of COVID situations where we've reduced the amount of our summer camps. So our opportunity for revenue really kind of dropped this summer. And so it was disappointing, but I'm still kind of excited that we're at least still making some pretty good revenue. So.
Park maintenance, we just did that.
Yeah.
Park foundation.
The only thing I got to share, and all of our artists left, but our art installation of all the benches should be coming in this month. I'm pretty excited about that.
Okay. I don't have a president's update.
Okay.
Directors.
A couple things. Well, in honor of our future department name being Cultural Arts, Parks, and Recreation, I'm just pretty excited about all the art stuff that we're doing. I don't know. I think this is probably the most art we've ever been doing and involved with. So I think it really kind of fits in with our new title. And as we start combining our efforts with a new division that's going to be taken on in our department, it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, those renderings are certainly inspiring. And
yeah.
As I mentioned before, I don't have a art mind, so it's cool to see those guys come in here, and you can tell they're passionate about it. So yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing everything.
Well, they definitely think outside the box, and I think I'm pretty creative, but yeah, these guys are very creative. One other thing I wanted to update on is the ice rink. As of today, we have put the request for proposal out, and so there's a lot of folks that think that we weren't doing anything in regards to addressing all the issues in the ice rink. And looking at what we could do, and if we were to cancel the contract right now with Genesis, it cost us lots and lots and lots of money. So that's one reason why the contract is actually being played out all the way through the ending, which is sometime middle to end of January. So we worked really hard on the request for proposal. It went out today. We're going to be putting it in some trade magazines as well as some consultants that I've worked with and that other folks have worked with. I've already spoken to some folks from Colorado and Minnesota and Wisconsin, Minnesota. And there's definitely some interest on operating and maintaining our ice rink. Part of it too, though, there's a two-part of this. There's also an opportunity to buy the ice rink. And with that, though, would be covenants that would require the operations to still be an ice rink. So you could buy it, but it would have to stay as an ice rink. This is similar to what we looked at when we did McDonald Golf Course. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of responses we get. And we have a pre-proposal meeting coming up in a week or two, and then the bids are actually due. This one I can remember, it's October 15th. So from there, it's kind of the same thing. We will have a couple members from staff on the committee to review, purchasing, finance, law department, and then we kind of have the same thing, 4 citizens that represent interest groups from the ice rink area, and they'll be on the committee to review and evaluate the proposals.
Great.
So
Are we, I haven't seen the RFP yet, but are we working in conjunction with the baseball team with their future plans as well for that park or the ice center? Or is that set far enough back that we don't really have to?
you're talking about the parking lot?
Parking lot, yeah.
Yeah. The parking lot is on the west side of the baseball stadium, so it's pretty far away. There's adequate parking right now for the ice rink and for any activities that go there, so it wasn't really anything that we were really too interested and concerned about, but knowing that there's going to be additional parking, and the interesting thing is the peak time of baseball is the non-peak time for the ice rink, and then vice versa. Obviously, there's not going to be any baseball in November, December, January, February, and even March, and that's when the ice rink is at its peak.
Okay.
So those are all things that we kind of talked about, but that particular situation in regards to the parking lot was not really anything that we factored in.
Okay. Anything else?
Tree policy?
Yes, tree policy. So, a little bit of history. We have a parking lot that's going in over at Botanica, and while that was being designed, it was designed by taking out some trees and opening up some space, went through all of the permitting process, went through all of the legalities that needed to go through, since it was more of a construction project and it was being funded by Botanica, I think they're paying 75% of it, but it was presented at council and it did get passed by council. But it was probably a little bit under the radar. So fast forward to now, the contracts all were signed, the work started going, and some of the trees were taken out. The question was, are these old growth trees? Are these protected trees? What kind of trees are there? Is there any kind of protection ordinance for trees? A lot of those questions came up. And we do have a very, very weak tree ordinance that lacks review from an arborist and a lot of other things. In particular, these trees were what we call, from the arborist perspective, trash trees. They weren't necessarily very native trees or old growth trees. So the idea from the planning and design aspect of it was they're going to clear those trees, but they're going to add in some more native trees. Typically what you find around parking lots, something that's a little bit more designed and to provide shade along the walkways and those type of things. So those trees are going to be replaced, or there's a mitigation plan for that. So while that was happening, though, there was a lot of folks that were kind of upset that those trees were being removed. And so the question was, how strong is our tree ordinance? What are some things that we can do to strengthen our tree ordinance, or do we need to? Is that something that the park board is interested in? So as a person who manages forestry, a person that actually manages the plantings of all the trees, and my time spent in Austin, where I was directly very much involved with taking care of all of our trees, I can call myself a tree hugger. I really can. I go hug a tree every once in a while. But it's a really difficult situation when you're looking at development versus the history of the tree, or what type of trees. If they're native trees, are there any built-in protections for those? So when I was thinking back when I was in Austin, we had really, really robust tree ordinances. If the tree was a certain diameter, they call it breast height diameter, there were certain protections for that tree. If it was a certain type of tree, species of tree, there was protections behind it. There was really big requirements for mitigation. If a tree was removed, how was it mitigated? Was there five trees planted for one tree? All those things were part of the tree protection ordinance that we had. We don't have any of those things here. And what the biggest thing is just the lack of review. So plans are made, whether it's a public property or whether it is on private property. So say we're building a new Kmart, or actually not, I shouldn't use that. We're building a new Walmart, I guess. A new Dollar General. Those go up everywhere. Those go up everywhere. What does the landscape look like? Are the trees being protected? So those are all the things that are big questions when they review the plans. We really don't ask those questions, and we really don't look at those things. So there's a lot of different levels of tree protection, and my question to the park board is that something that you're interested in? Is that this would be a long endeavor of education and bringing in presentations, sharing best practices from other cities. Going back to when I was in Austin, again, you're talking to somebody who wants to protect the trees. There are certain situations where the tree ordinance really hindered big-time development, and where developers really had to spend a lot of money to design around one tree. And sometimes it's worth it. Sometimes it's really kind of important to do that, and sometimes it's not. So, I could see both sides of the situation. But my question is, what's the desire from the park board? Do you want more information? Is this a topic that's worthy of more investigation and presentation? Or are you pretty satisfied with where we're at right now?
Well, I'm just going to say from my perspective, from the conversations that I've had, this is an issue that a lot of people have a lot of strong feelings on. And I totally hear what you're saying about not having regulations in place that are going to hinder common sense things moving forward. I want to know, though, if there's a way, because I think 80% of the problem, from what I heard about this Botanica situation, was just a lack of communication. And that's not, I don't think that's a malicious thing. I just think it's that everybody's doing the best that they can. And they were like, hey, we got this approved 2 years ago. And so, the folks who may have forgotten about it, frankly, They might have just completely, and now they're all whipped up again because they didn't get, the whole story told to them, and they didn't know they were mitigating things that are coming forward. So I think that for a lot of this stuff, like say, hey, look at what you're going to get. Like look at, and not only is this necessary, and go through that, just put out a little message on that when something like this is going to happen. But why are we doing it? How are we going to make it even better? Just because people want to know, and I really think that's going to be like 80% of what we're talking about. The other 20%. I think, in addition to our staff numbers coming back, because I think a lot of people are just kind of working really hard and doing the best they can with limited time and resources. And that makes a lot of other difficult conversations. I think people just want to have a chance to have alternative solutions, perhaps. And maybe that if they can come together with some, not as broad of a definition that they had in Austin, but maybe a Wichita-sized regulation that says, hey, here's your opportunity. If you have an idea on something that you have personal vested interest, you're a community stakeholder, here's your chance to get your voice heard. Rather than feeling like, well, this is, you lost it, it's done, because we've just decided that's what's gonna happen. That's, when I hear about folks who have strong opinions on tree issues, it's typically one of those two things in my short tenure here so far. So I would like to hear what some possible happy medium solutions would be, without being too heavy-handed, but also helping to ease some of these concerns.
So the two items that you're talking about, I think are really low-hanging fruit. And this could be for all kinds of construction projects, when they're going out there, there's more opportunities for that information to go out. So a presentation to the neighborhood, a presentation to the stakeholders. In this situation, the stakeholders was Botanica. Mm-hmm. And there's really not anything adjacent to that in regards to neighborhoods. But there's probably an overall bigger neighborhood association, or definitely the DAB from that district that could have received some information.
Yeah.
So maybe that's part of it, is it's written into the ordinance that each one of these projects, and we're talking public projects, not private development, but when it's a city project, that there's more efforts for engagement. And we've been doing that for the most part. I think we've been doing tons of DAB and other type of stakeholder type of presentations. The other one is sharing the mitigation information, and I think that's could be part of that messaging as well. So those are things that I could come back with some more polished suggestions and proposals, and ultimately this would have to go to council. And the two areas that would really have the biggest effect on would be Public Works Engineering and MABCD, because they're the ones that review all the plans. And that could be something that's written into their process of reviewing plans, making sure that that information goes out. A lot of times, a lot of these pieces of information go into the newspaper. I don't know if you guys ever notice and look in the very back, and it says, public notice, and the fine print is there. And if you don't know what you're looking for, I don't think too many people spend time reading those.
So as the environmental engineer on the board, so I will say that what normally is done, that about the paper, is like if you're trying to change your air permit or some kind of environmental permit, it goes in the paper because it says, I'm trying to put more VOCs into the atmosphere, so I would like your permission to do that and change your air shed. So the tree thing could be something along the same lines. We call it an environmental impact assessment. And it could be one page where the arborist fills it out with a 3-page document that says if it meets these criteria, right? It's a native tree, it's more than 50 years old, we need to have a larger discussion about it before a 50-year-old tree that's this large is torn down. It doesn't have to be something large, but a very small environmental impact assessment to it. Mm-hmm. If it's a non-native tree, it's a trash tree, as you would call it, right? It doesn't change the canopy of our, our tree canopy. Taking away will not cause the harm to the bigger picture. But does that make sense to have a more of an environmental impact assessment of what it does to the community? Something small but not 400 pages long. Right. Pulling the arbors, they probably give us good information to put in that 1-page assessment. And if you get to this criteria at the end, a number of sudden, like a risk assessment, then you have to get this approval to cut the tree down.
That sounds in line with, I mean, I'm talking about just a moderate proposal for, like, we gotta take a step to be responsive to, you know, those kind of issues. And it sounds like,
Right.
if this is an established practice with other areas, I think if we could replicate that and just say, hey, this is what's working here and here and here, and like, what is the best path forward? And I think that sounds like a great thing to consider.
It's common practice to do environmental site assessment on something you're going to remove something, so, or harm something that could be there, you know, it could be anything, so.
And Troy, I would just only finally say that I think that if we could just include several of the recent things that, like, what are the ways that, like, this could have been mitigated if we had these steps in place. If we had this document, then in this situation, we could have done this instead. In this situation, we could have done this instead, in this situation. So like, moving forward, it's not gonna be a question. Like, you have the opportunity to have an appeal, you have the opportunity to have a discussion and some timeline, and this was your public notice time. Everybody is aware of all that stuff, so. In any case, I really appreciate you being responsive to that, and thank you very much, Phil, for your thoughts on it.
Sounds more in regards to just getting information out, informing the public.
Yeah. I think it's a huge part of it, and I think people will really appreciate even just small steps in that regard.
Yeah. All right.
Awesome.
A couple more things.
Go for it.
The question about virtual attendance to park board meetings. So we have a situation right now where, actually I should put this back on. Due to COVID, we're doing different things a little bit differently. And so what we ended up doing was doing virtual meetings 100%. But to get that engagement, to get that face-to-face, to have more conversation and whatnot, in-person meetings really have a bigger impact. But right now, not everybody's available. So just wanted to have a conversation about it. Also, I think we have some issues with our bylaws that maybe Beth can share with us.
I did not pursue that, quite frankly, because no other boards have that in the city. Our city council doesn't have that. So there's a lot of issues. Are you going to allow virtual meetings all the time? I mean, is everybody just going to call in and you never have a public meeting? You're still going to have a public room somewhere, preferably in City Hall, where the public comes and everybody is on a screen and there is audio and visual interaction to satisfy your open meetings. We didn't have a problem with that during COVID because the governor declared an emergency and the Open Meeting Act was not suspended, but it encompassed virtual meetings. That is done. Our governor, you know, those declarations are over, so we no longer have that exception, if you will, to the Open Meetings Act. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that have to be done. We'd have to make sure that our city audiovisual folks can set that up. You lose the interaction with the public, the engagement, the face-to-face. You know, that's just all up to you guys as a board.
What have we done in the past when somebody's out of town? I've been on this board for 3 years now, and I want to say that 3 or 4 different times people have called in to vote.
They can call in as long as what they say can be heard by the public.
Yeah.
And they can hear what's going on. I mean, you have to satisfy the open meeting requirements.
Yeah, 100%.
They can't just, you know, listen in and cast, you know, anything they comment on has to be able to be broadcast out to the public. So
Right.
if everybody's virtual, you've still got to have a spot where the public comes and can listen and hear everything that's going on.
Well, I'm not a huge proponent of going all virtual again because last year was tough on everybody. I
And
like
there's
to-
always technical glitches and.
Sure,
you
yeah,
know,
absolutely.
I mean, it happens.
I think today's a perfect situation. You know, we can't vote on stuff that needs to be voted on. because we don't have a quorum. Tori mentioned, this afternoon that she would call in, but she wasn't sure about the Zoom connection or whatever. I'm not sure what that conversation looked like between her and staff, but she relayed to me that she felt like she wasn't allowed to call in. So I guess obviously the world has changed in the past 18 months or whatever it is. I think we got to be fluid to that.
I was on travel last month, and I was able to join via Zoom Teams, I guess it was. And I know I was kind of speaking voice of God here, but I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I was able to communicate. I was heard, and I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that was an emergency and an exceptional circumstance. And I mean, I'd rather be at least able to cast a vote and have my attendance marked rather than. That's important to me. It's like, yes, I completely agree. I think there should be a public space, and like having a hybrid setting potentially. I don't know how difficult that would be in the bylaws. I agree that, we want to, ideally, yeah, there would be no COVID. But I mean, like, I'd rather that than, no quorum. Strongly prefer that.
So I guess my question to legal would be how in the weeds do we want to get during the bylaws, for the bylaws? I mean, can we just put in there an exceptional circumstance?
I would suggest that you have something in there that defines when it's allowed, so that people don't just all start calling in, because, hey, I don't want to put on pants today, so, I mean.
Well, I would imagine if you're willing and able to make it, then we expect you to be in attendance.
Right.
But if you're on travel or
Well, yeah, you can stay out of town, or maybe you're sick and don't want to, I mean, you feel like sitting through a meeting, but you don't want to come infect everyone.
Right.
You have a number of absences allowed.
Right.
Could you put a number of
You
hybrid
could
meetings
limit
that you attend?
sure.
You could do that.
Well, I like the idea of it also just if you have to be somewhere for work. I mean, this is a citizen board, so we are working people by and large, and so if people are by necessity gone, I do like that. I mean, one way to get around it is you could have a regulation that says as long as the CDC has said there is a pandemic, we are, and that's the off switch. If one day in the future we're back to not having a global pandemic and the CDC or the local health authorities are not advising immunocompromised people from wearing masks. I mean, I think there is
Aren't you also, though, wanting to be able to call in if you're traveling for business, regardless of whether there's COVID or not?
Well, sure. I mean, if there had to be some kind of a legal wording on that, I mean, that could be your entree to say like that's like where it's just going to be considered. You don't have to have an excuse. Otherwise, if you're on travel for something else, you need to, I don't know. I'm just trying to make it as easy as possible for both sides of the discussion on that.
Well, it sounds like COVID is the catalyst of all this.
Mm-hmm.
However, other situations kind of fit into that category as well. And maybe it's not a COVID situation, but maybe it's what causes you to call in or Zoom in is XYZ. And then the thing that I'm really concerned about is I don't want it to depend on that and have board members rely on that for every single meeting. So again, my thought is just like we have a number of absences, there's a number of virtual meetings that are allowed.
Sure.
Troy, I would suggest, can you guys get it closer to your mics, please?
Okay.
I'm sorry, I completely forgot about that. I apologize, and I'm masked too.
Getting lazy.
Troy, I would suggest too, talking with, I don't know if it's, the city council, I mean, they appoint this board, how do they feel about allowing that? And maybe that's something you go through the manager, I don't know what your protocol is for that, but
Well, I could use this
think
communication
probably they
item.
need to have some input on that.
Yeah, so we got this communication section.
Yeah.
I will share this information with the city manager and see if I can get some kind of response. And it's his job to decide to take it to council. So
Well, and everybody here can talk to their own council member.
you're right about that.
It would be a perfect thing to
Yeah.
ask your appointing
Board mayor.
council member, do you care if this board
Yep.
as a virtual meeting provision. But I would suggest a bylaw that like, you mentioned some parameters, Troy, about only so many meetings. Eddie, you said, let's define when it's acceptable. I think that would be the best way to do it, because we do count absences, and if
Sure.
somebody just calls in for 12 months straight,
Yeah.
you know, you do lose engagement, you really do. And
Yeah, absolutely.
there's also got to be, and Penny knows this, there's got to be the technical ability too. So that's probably something that needs to, I don't know what all that entails, Penny, setting that up. I'm sorry, I don't. I should after a year of watching it, but I just sort of showed up and you were all plugged in and ready to go, and not being real techie myself, I didn't pay attention to it, so.
I'm learning quickly.
Yeah, yeah, we did learn on, right, but that's just my thoughts on it legally.
So
from
let
a
me,
legal standpoint.
Yeah.
push
Deal with
this,
Bob.
push this up
Yep.
to the city manager. I'll ask the question, and I'll frame it with some parameters around it, and then I'll bring it back and for you guys to have a discussion.
Excellent.
Okay.
Anything else?
Staffing and pools. Pools are closed. Staffing, we're still trying to hire folks, so.
Is there a provision for interim board members, just since we're short a member now? I mean, for vacancies, and maybe perhaps Councilmember Claycomb's being respectful of just the election time, but I just didn't know if there was some kind of, I mean, like, that would also solve an issue with quorum, just we're down
that's-
a member.
And that was one of the things I was gonna email her and ask her what's her intentions to fill it. It could be filled just for a short period of time, could be filled for a lot longer. If there is a turnover in council member, a lot of times they keep that.
Right.
So they just have a head start for 4 months now. So I'm gonna shoot her an email and ask her, but it's ultimately her decision to make.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, guys, anything else? Anything we need on the agenda for next month? If not, we will be adjourned.
All right.
Thanks, guys.